Good morning, everyone. Sorry, good afternoon. This is Academy of Cheese session. What are we on? Four?
Three.
Session three. Exciting. We're going to start off with tasting some cheese. This week's cheese is a fresh and fresh and acidic cheese. You should have in front of you. What have you guys, Timmy, and Christian? What have you got in your terms of cheeses for this week?
I have burrata, this one.
Nice. Good.
And halloumi.
Good.
Yeah, and the sherbet.
So is that got a mold rind? It does have a mold rind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's very good. What have we got? Christian, what have you got?
So I have a goat cheese, just a fresh goat cheese. I have burrata. I have halloumi. So I definitely have these.
Okay. Well, let's start with Claire. You and I have got a rather sad-looking burrata, haven't we?
It must have been the smallest tub they could find.
Yes. No. Okay. Let's start with burrata. Because for the first time, which is great, all three of us or four of us are eating the same cheese, which is actually very exciting. So let's start with that. You now should have the printed sheets. I'm going to have to apologize. I feel like I'm apologizing a lot in this course. I hadn't realized that the materials for the delegates pack was not available on your learning road. I had assumed it was because it was on the previous website. The upgrade had not, but you should now have it from PDFs. So grab yourself a sheet and let's head into a tasting room and start on a burrata. Remember, please do your observations first. Those observations, as we've come to realize, are very important to understand the structure, the history, the condition, and the tells of a cheese, the bit that tells us what it is or what it should be, what it is and what it should be. So good luck with that. You've got your 12 minutes. I'm putting you into breakout room now. Create rooms, and I will see you in 12 minutes. See you shortly. Oops, what's oops all about?
You're there. I'm still doing it.
Righty ho. Let's talk burrata. So before we well, maybe we'll do the observations first. Who's up for an observation? I think it should be Christian or Timmy. You've both got whole burratas, whereas we've got only partial ones. Christian, let's hear it.
Observations. From the start to the beginning on our little burrata. So
I'll let you choose what you think is important, but go with how you observed the cheese and what it was you were seeing. What did you think you'd like to say for someone who'd never seen a burrata before? What is it about a burrata that's characteristic?
It's rindless. There's no rind on it. It's white on the outside. When you cut it open, the interior.
Christian. Always say the most obvious stuff. Look.
It's round.
It's round. It's a ball. It looks a bit like a mozzarella. But I think what happens with people like us who know our cheeses well, we often omit these very basic things. It's a round ball that's squidgy. You know, that's I'll get to. It's wet. Those are the things that someone coming to it for the first time would say. So let's get those easy wins out of the way and then move on to the detail.
Okay, so we have our round ball here, rindless. Shall we go into the paste in the interior already, or is there anything else you think there's?
Just tick off some of the important characteristics above the line. You know, what milk is it, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, mine is made from buffalo.
Okay.
It's a PGI. It's unaged, you would hope. It's a soft cheese, which is fresh. It used an animal rennet. What else we have here? It's rolled as a postmate. Does that make sense?
It's rolled.
Or what would you call it?
Yeah. It's actually pasta filata, but it comes under the grouping of wrapped, rolled, and physically processed. Yes, very much so.
What else we got? I think that's it
Okay.
from that perspective. I mean, then
So
we look.
what size was
Yeah.
yours? What sort of weight size was yours?
Yeah, it was a good size. I mean, this is now the half of it what I have left.
Okay, so probably about 200 grams, maybe something like that.
Yeah, around that.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And did it come suspended in whey or a cream?
It in weight. Yeah.
Okay. So now you've cut it open and you're inspecting the rind in that it sort of doesn't have one. Okay, let's pick that apart a bit, because it's sort of, I always describe mozzarella's and burrata as having almost like a boiled egg, a soft boiled egg kind of rind. Do you know what I mean? And I think that is distinct from what's inside the cheese. So if you have a look at what's inside the cheese, it has this sort of filament kind of character.
Mm.
The Italians have a word for this called stracciatella, which we have heard of because it's actually a word we often use in the normal world to describe a type of ice cream. Do you know stracciatella ice cream? It's the same word. So, and it's got lots of little lines on it, which is actually slightly different from the mold. Do you know how it's made, Christian?
Not fully.
Hot water.
Okay, so what's the difference between a burrata and a mozzarella? Okay, so a burrata starts life as a mozzarella. So a mozzarella is a ball, sort of cricket ball size, or a softball, or whatever your local ball thing is, tennis ball maybe. And I always think that the way to think about it from a burrata perspective is like a pouch in a Dick Whittington play. You know, like Robin Hood, little pouch that he hangs, he puts his gold pieces in. You go into the mozzarella, you take out the center, leaving the pouch, you squeeze that stracciatella, the solids, and you take out the whey and you replace it with cream. And if you think of a mozzarella as having that kind of, not too much sourness, but the whey, the wetness that's in a mozzarella has a sourness to it. We're going to take that out and we're going to replace it with the sweetness of cream. And that's what a burrata is. And once we've made that stracciatella creamy paste, we're going to put it back in our mozzarella pouches. And I don't know if yours has it, Timmy and Christian, but is it got a little tie or a little bit of green string or plastic that's
It's supposed to be inside?
It would be on the outside. It's actually where in traditional mozzarella, burrata, they do actually tie it. They tie the
Oh, you have tired.
You've got one, Timmy?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yours is, can you see that, Christian? A little bit higher there, Timmy. So it's literally, you tie the pouch back up again. Historically, it was done with grass, which is why often that's what the one Timmy's got is relatively unusual. It's tied with a kind of rather good looking ribbon. But historically, it would have been with grass. And that's why common ones from Italy now would have a bit of green plastic tying it to. So that pouch is, so this actually has two physical processes. The physical process is the pasta filata, which is the making of the mozzarella. But again, this second physical process when we're taking stuff out, mixing it with cream and putting it in. So it's also technically flavor added because we're adding a cream into the cheese as a new ingredient, which I'm not sure it says in the Academy of Cheese Material, but it is the case. And it's why you get this very distinctive sweetness. All right, so keep going. What sort of texture did you think, Christian?
A soft one. I've given it a 1.
Yeah, you do get a bit of I haven't got any tissues here, but it's oh, I do actually. You can feel it, but it's very givey, isn't it? There's a little bit of texture there when you squeeze it, but not much. Any bluing or anything like that?
Color, none.
No color. Sorry, I interrupted you. You said color.
The color is obviously white again.
Yeah, very white.
yeah, and it's creamy in the inside.
What about a smell?
Barely anything, right? I mean, the intensity is very little.
No.
I given it a 1 on intensity.
Yeah, no, there's nothing there at all, is there?
Yeah, it's barely, you know, really have to put your nose into it.
No, I'm not. I can smell something, but I'm not even sure it's the cheese. It might be on my fingers, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I was drinking tequila last night for the football, so I think I can still smell that. I do like burrata. It's very delicious. Right. All right. Now let's get into the mouthfeel. Christian, keep going. What do you think of the mouthfeel?
So we're again soft, giving it a 2 on the mouthfeel. I given mine on the wet drying bit a 2 as well. Could be a little bit more wet. It seems to be already a little bit. It seems to get a little crumbly.
You got a bit crumbly.
It starts to get towards this. I had burrata many times before where it's much more liquid, much more runny, and
yeah, no, I think that you might have a slightly dry one. The one that Claire and I have got are both. Yeah, I could pour this out. Okay, I'll catch you later. Thank you very much. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a slightly crumbly one. Can you show us it, Christian?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to make your screen bigger. Yeah.
Almost looks like cottage cheese.
It does, doesn't it? Is it quite filamenty, or is it broken up and is it crumbly?
I mean, it was a little gooey in the middle, which I ate already.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like all cheeses, burratas vary. So I guess we've just got a variable one. Can you feel when it's in your mouth the texture of the filamenty bits?
I mean, it still tastes very fresh. But it does have a little bit like this cottage cheese texture feeling to it.
Yeah, I think you've got an outlier, is the answer. I think you've got an outlier. Claire and Timmy, what does yours feel like in the mouth?
Not pleasant.
Not pleasant.
I don't like burrata. I adore mozzarella, buffalo mozzarella. There is just something about burrata. I just don't like that two-tone, sort of those two textures.
What about you, Timmy?
The mouthfeel for me is not good.
It's chewy, and then I detect just only like the sweetness of this one. For the complex flavor, I got like creamy, milky, like only that.
Yeah. All right. All right, Timmy, as you started, let's hear the big numbers on the simple and complex flavors.
Complex flavor for the milk and creamy, I get like 9. Yeah. And then sweet, I give like around 5 and then come up to 6 and then drop down.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems to make a bit of sense. Is there anything else? Anybody else want to throw any other flavors at this?
I got a sour note to mine, especially at the end. It sort of increased as I sort of went through chewing it. Whatever you do with it.
Obviously nothing that you want to do with it. I think while you're chewing the texturous, the fibrous bits, you retain the creaminess, but once you've swallowed, it does actually, the cheese I've got ends up having a slight sour, very, very mildly astringent note, that always a bit mouth cleaning, which is strange because it's so creamy when it remains, but then it becomes quite oh, I don't know, sort of clean down, a bit sort of cleaning fluidy, which is not so nice. Very simple flavor. It's widely thought to be incredibly luxurious, a burrata. It's like the poshest version of mozzarella you can find. You can imagine, I mean, what do we think the life of a mozzarella is? Sort of 2 to 3 days at its peak, but maybe 7 to 12-ish days, you know, kept in a fridge. A burrata is about 2/3 of that, sometimes even less. It's very difficult for cheesemongers in the UK to stock burrata unless they've got a really strong demand. So they tend to stock it for order, certainly for smaller cheesemongers. But if you've got chefs love it. It's really good in a range of dishes. It responds quite well in starters. And I have to say, there's a pizza restaurant where I used to live who would use it instead of mozzarella routinely, and it's sort of delicious in that context as well. But strangely enough, you guys are really not pro. You know, that's. Timmy, have you had it before?
Yes.
You like it?
I think I prefer like mozzarella better than this one.
Okay, cool. And Christian?
I love it.
I love it. I love it too. I love it too. I've got 2 in my fridge right now, which I'm looking forward to later. So, all right, that's very good. Okay, now, did we manage to make any cheese?
Yeah.
Right, let's have a look at what you got. Cool. Did you manage to strain the milk from the milk? Wow, Claire, look at that. That is professional.
It's my jam making kit.
Okay, that's what that is. Well, that just goes to show that preserving stuff is all got a lot more in common than you think. Did you manage to preserve to strain your soured milk jar for a start?
Yeah.
We were going to strain that. Did Timmy or Christian do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what sort of texture did you get?
Sticky, like gooey,
Okay.
with the horrible smell.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, and Claire, no more eating of your soured milk, okay?
No, I had some pink mold appear on it, and at that point,
don't do that.
I threw it away.
No. Bad plan. Don't do that. What about you, Christian? What did you get?
Yeah, it was very creamy, gooey, but the smell of it, yeah, no thank you.
Okay. So what we did there is we allowed milk to go off, we know that, but what we did is I did absolutely no controlling of what bacteria was allowed to do its thing. It is lactic acid producing bacteria, LAB, but what it was, we will never know because it's whatever was in there at the time or maybe was floating around your homes and got in there. Consequently, it's basically a clean slate for any sort of bacterias, molds, or enzymes, bacterias, molds, or yeasts. And that is why we don't eat it, because we've put no controls in place. The mold that Claire's picking out, you said it was a pink mold, Claire?
Yes.
There are some was it long hair mold, short hair mold?
It was like little circles of pink mold, a little bit hairy.
Sounds
I
like
should have taken a photo, shouldn't I?
Well, it's interesting. There are so many molds. I am very far from being an expert on these kinds of molds, particularly when you get into multicolored molds. You get pinks and yellows and occasionally blues and things like that. But you also get the black ones, the grey ones, sort of what they call mucors, which there's just more than a person can have. But now we've made cheese second time in controlled circumstances where we are dropping the acidity manually using an acid, an LAB or an acid substitute. Christian, did you use the same one that was on Amazon as we got?
No, I used a slightly different one, or let me rather put it this way, I will use a slightly different one. My cheese making kit is hopefully here either tomorrow or Wednesday.
Okay, well, watch what we're talking about here and compare it to what you discover when you do it yourself. Timmy, how did you get on?
This one I put the acid first, and then after that I put rennet.
Do you know what kind of acid?
I think it's lactic.
It's lactic acid. So
yeah.
Because I think, Claire, the one that we get is citric acid. Is that right?
Yeah, but no rennet in mine.
You didn't put the rennet in.
No, it doesn't call for it in the recipe.
Okay. Did you, but did everyone, I mean, did Timmy and Claire, did you get yours to coagulate? Did you get the way out? Did you get the water out?
I had to redo mine. It didn't have a lot first time round.
Okay. Okay. Claire, if you have the time, do it again and use rennet. Did it not say in my instructions to use rennet?
Oh, sorry, I'm getting confused between following the first 3 instructions from your little book. And,
Right.
I'm doing the goat's cheese recipe
Okay.
one because I got goat's milk.
Okay. Well, it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is get a texture out of it from which we can experiment. Now, that early texture of that paste, which we think that both Timmy and Claire have got. So have you put it between your fingers and have a bit of a squeeze and get a sense of what it's like? Because it'll go down to even less than Christian's mozzarella. It'll go around to barely anything at all, almost till it becomes almost like an oil or a cream. Claire, I heard you smell it there. What are you smelling? What does it smell?
Nothing. It's very just completely clean.
What about yours, Timmy?
Yeah, really bad. Like, I don't know what it smells like this one, but it's like gooey.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you make it? Yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday, like Sunday night.
Okay. All right. Are you going to feel brave enough to taste it when the time comes? You're not sure. I'm sure Claire will. All right. So you've just used acidity. So that's well, it's not in your case, Claire. It's a citric acidification. Now, you remember from last week, that's about dropping to the isoelectric point. Does anybody remember what the isoelectric point was or is?
4.6.
4.6. And Claire, as you are on it, can you remind us what happens at 4.6 pH?
That's where you get the coagulation of the curd.
Because
you've dropped the pH down, so your acidity's risen.
And all those negatively charged micelles stop being negatively charged. They become neutrally charged.
They have their ends
so instead of repelling each other, they don't mind being next to each other, and they begin to glob up. Technical term, not a technical term actually, but it's
with your calcium phosphate bridge.
No, you need rennet for that.
Rennet for that, right?
So at the moment, if we're just doing lactic acidification, but I think Timmy, you had some rennet in a little plastic tub, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you used it?
Use it. Just only a little bit.
Yes, you don't need very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're putting it between your fingers, I'm expecting you to get more texture than when Claire puts it between her fingers, because Claire's won't have any of these calcium bridges. They will just be adjacent micelles, making like an oil. And whereas yours, Timmy, they're going to try and stick together a bit more robustly. So if anybody wants to do a little bit of experimentation on their own, do the same process, one with rennet and one without. Christian, you might choose to do this. Very easy to do. Just cut it in half, add rennet to one half, not the other, and just feel the difference in textures. And you can see that one has got a bit more rigidity to it, a bit more rigidity. And that rigidity is in fact also more elastic, strangely enough, which is why we're going to get different outcomes when we get to soften them up and that kind of thing. All right, we are now going to taste it. Are we ready? Timmy, you look super enthusiastic. Okay, I want you to get some salt. And I want you to taste it, and I want you to get yourself a sheet like this. And we're going to do A, B, C, and D, okay? A, no salt. B, a little bit of salt. C, maybe the right kind of amount of salt. And D, too much salt. And just against the simple flavors, we're going to write A, B, C, D and see if they move, okay? So let's do it together. In fact, I'm not going to do it. I think you can have it in your breakout room. So Christian, you're in charge of recording this as you haven't got the cheese make to hand. But Claire and Timmy, I want you to talk to Christian and so that you're expressing yourself. So you're saying, right, with no salt, this cheese is like a 01010 or something on savory, sweet, salt, bitter, and acid. And a little bit of salt, and just see where it goes, and draw a little arrow on your chart of how it changes with the salt. Do you feel my instructions are clear enough? I can sometimes be a bit unclear. Christian, nod, or at least nod if you think you understand. Claire?
Yeah.
Timmy?
Yeah.
Okay, so add a little bit of salt each time, and when you come back out of the room, we want to have concluded about what salt has done to the flavor profile of this cheese. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, so we have in front of us cheese. We have made the most basic kind. We just take milk, and what do we take out?
Whey, right?
Take out whey. Whey, moisture in the form of whey. We are taking out water, the oldest form of preservation there is. So we are going to take out the whey, and we get left with the solids. The solids are made up of, quick reprise. What are solids made up of?
Curds.
Curds. And what are curds? What's constituent parts of curd? We looked at the end of last week, we did some nice little pie charts of mozzarella, of cheddar, of Cheshire, and of Parmesan. And we saw that it was water and what are the two big building blocks of cheese?
Protein, right?
And brilliant, very good to me. And protein and
Fat.
protein and fat. So what you've got when you are squeezing it in that white stuff in your fingers is half protein, half fat, right? Might be a little bit more protein, maybe a little bit less fat, whatever, but it is protein and fat in its most simple form. No structure, it's just a goo. And from that, we can take it all the way to Parmesan. It's just a matter of skill and time. So, but most of all, we do it to make it taste nice. So Christian has just slipped away, but you have now tasted it with 4 different levels of salt. And we have seen, I'm hoping, that not only the saltiness of the cheese has changed, we've seen other movements. Have you seen other movements as well?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, on the basis that we don't know how long it's going to be, let's kick on. And let's start with saltiness. Does it become salty? And if so, at what point?
Like for the flavor tree, it will be like a little bit like, I taste like very salty, but not too much. But for the level 4 that I put too much, I didn't detect anything, just only like gooey and then or the crunchy from the salt, and a little bit, not a little bit, like too much like bitter at the end.
Okay, so let's start with not enough salt, just a hint of salt.
Yeah.
Does the salt, can you taste the salt when you put a little salt in, or does it knock one of the other flavors up a bit, or does the salt come through straight away?
I cannot detect much of them, but it makes the cheese taste better.
Yeah, in its most simple terms, Timmy, you've absolutely nailed it. Somehow it makes the cheese taste better. The way I like to think of it is salt is the air in the flavor balloon. Without salt, kind of none of the flavors are detectable. It sort of expands them all to a degree. So the first flavor, even though you're adding salt, the first flavor often isn't saltiness, even though you're adding salt to other things. So without the salt, what were the sweet, salt, savory, acid, and bitter levels that you tasted? On our, not 5. So Christian, you're back in the room. You are the designated speaker for our team of expert cheese makers and tasters. So what did they tell you that the flavor numbers were when there was no salt in it?
Well, I can only at the moment speak on Claire's behalf. I had to let Timmy there on his own for a moment. Apologies about that. But with no salt, and when we look at the simple flavors, the big components were definitely sweet, followed by some acid and a little bit of savory.
Okay, so I don't want to put numbers in your mouth. So what numbers are we talking about? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Well, I put the numbers there for Claire, kind of. Like, so, like on a savory, it did say we put like towards 2, sweet 6, and then acid on the gauge, 4.
Yeah. Okay. And on salt and bitterness, nothing at all.
No.
Okay, so then I put my A's like that. So savory, sweet, salt. Have I not put one on the bitter? I've not put, but anyway, you said it was none, and then up for acid. Okay, we've added our first bit of salt. Where am I putting my B's?
Your B's?
Okay, so a little bit of salt. How do those numbers move?
The savoury moved up.
To what?
It brought the savouriness out really to about a sort of 6, 7.
Wow, quite a long way up. Okay, keep going. Did it move the sweetness at all?
It did, yeah. It sort of brought out some sweetness.
So you previously had it at 6. You're moving it up to 7.
I would probably have put it a little bit below the 6.
Okay.
First time round, yeah.
So maybe 5 going to 6 or 4 going to 5 or something like that. Okay, okay. Saltiness. Did you detect any saltiness when you added salt? At what level?
It was sort of probably around a 4.
Okay. Any bitterness happening here at all?
No.
And has the acid moved at all?
It's become less because I thought it was quite sour when it was A.
Mm-hmm.
So it's lower.
So lower to a 2, lower to a 3.
Yeah, around. I put it around about a 4.
Okay, we're now adding a bit more salt. Obviously, this is an unscientific journey, so I was hoping at the second time I said you got the right amount of salt. The kind of salt that you go, this is what I'd do if it was on my plate. Where is it now? Where's it gone now?
I added too much salt.
Oh, okay. Timmy, how did you get on?
For not adding sauce, the savory I got like around 4.
Okay.
But when I add a little bit salt, it become like more savory, and then I taste the nuttiness on that one. The sweetness of this one, for like not adding salt, I got like around 4, and then it's coming up to 5 and then drop down. But I'm not sure when I'm adding salt, I taste like the less sweetness, maybe because of the salt or something. And I can detect like more bitterness when I put a little bit salt. The acid, and then the acid is the same. I cannot detect anything.
Okay. All right, let's move to too much salt. What happens when you have too much salt in, Claire and Timmy?
It just totally overrides the savouriness.
Yeah. Okay.
Just knocks everything flat.
So the sweet, the savoury, and possibly the acid and the bitter, they then decline as the salt rises. Is that right? Now,
yes.
I'm not expecting you to answer to this, but is it possible that it's not declining, it's just being dominated?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't know, do we? Basically, our taste buds are going, oh, salt! And you're going, if there's anything else getting a look in, it's not getting a look in. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a whiteboard moment here. Where's my share screen? Okay. So sweet, apologies for my salt, savory. I mean, obviously enjoying doing my S's today. Acid and bitter. So 0, 5, 10, and I'm going to approximate here because we've all slightly different, but you had quite a, where's your sweetness? Your sweetness sort of did this as you added more salt. Is that right?
Mhm.
Your saltiness went from really quite low or none, or the more salt you added, the more hot. The savoriness started much lower and went higher than your sweetness. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your acidity did that. And your bitterness, well, something in this area, pretty low. But it basically declined. Is that fair enough? So what I want to draw attention to, your experiences here are typical. I think we could argue about whether we're over here or perhaps higher or lower, but the principle is the same. Salt obviously has a flavor in itself. The more salt you add, the more it tastes of salt. Sweetness is enhanced by saltiness, right? There is a bump, a positive bump in the road when you add sweetness, but it's less than, say, savoriness. Savoriness is heavily powered by saltiness, and strongly, this doesn't matter where you are in whatever food, savoriness is nothing without salt. I'm simplifying slightly, but it really is often the case. So savoriness can really be enhanced by saltiness. I'm going to go to bitterness next and come back to acidity. Bitterness and salt tend not to have a relationship except where salt just dominates bitterness and you can't taste it because the salt has got all your attention, at which point bitterness drops out. But it doesn't tend to be activated by salt, not like sweetness and savory do. Acidity, more complicated. One of the reasons more complicated is there are salts that taste a bit acidic and acids that taste salty. So they have not so much correlation as they impinge on each other's territory, if that makes sense. So something that's highly acidic, highly salty, has a sort of acidic tinge to it. It has that kind of burn or tang. And likewise, there are some acids, and butyric acid, which you will have encountered level 1, which is common in things like Roquefort, give a taste of saltiness, even though they are technically acids. So they do overlap somewhat. So there are bits, in some ways it's a bit like bitterness, acidity and salt aren't related, but there's this secondary element that acids can taste like salts and salts can taste like acids. So they can interact with each other as far as the experience goes. But the interesting bit is the salt and the savory, right? Salts help you taste sweet and savory. They just help. And they expand on it. Now, I'm not a taste specialist in this particular area, a taste biologist, you might say, so I'm not going to try or attempt to justify this in terms of what your polyps, your little sensors in your tongue are doing, but we need to be aware of this. And you are aware of this because every human being on the planet likes to add salt to their food, and there's a reason for that, because it makes it tasty. So let's again focus on the obvious. We like salt, it makes things tasty, and it's as true for cheese. So a lot of the time when we're talking about why do we add salt to cheese, a lot of our first answers are as a preservative, and it has an important element in terms of cheese making. But the other part of it is, and we must never forget this, bottom line, cheese tastes nicer with salt in it. All right, it just does. Okay, so we're going to continue putting salt in our cheese no matter what the health police are telling us. Okay, we're going to put salt in our cheese. All right, do you feel comfy with that? Thank you for doing that, everyone. You've come up with well, not the right answers that are representative in a broad sense. Let's get rid of that now. Okay.
That's really interesting, Charlie, because at the moment I'm on various medications which make you really sensitive to acid.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone really off blue cheese at the moment.
Okay.
And especially cooked blue cheese. I just can't stand it. So
I think you'll find that what you'll hear is tasting what is the acid in blue cheese. There's quite a lot of acids knocking around. Acids are a very interesting and complex world. And it looks like you're being triggered by some of the acids that are naturally produced. A lot of flavor. So amino acids and fatty acids are two of the big building blocks of flavor. We're about to get onto them actually, and we'll talk about them. So, okay, so we've made our own cheese. We made our cheese at the most basic level. Pint of milk, let it go off. What happens? Naturally occurring bacteria kick out acid. The acid coagulates and meets an isoelectric point, all falls to the bottom. Awesome. Then we went and made cheese using acid, where we deliberately, in controlled environments, allows us to taste it, made curd, and then we pushed that through into begin to make really flavorsome cheese by adding salt, which raises it to the point of niceness. Timmy went ahead and went with rennet, where we began to see the texture of the curd becoming a bit firmer. Christian, as I said, when you get to make your cheese, try and make some with just acid and rennet, feel the difference. And Claire, and I'm sure you will because you're that kind of person, go and make yourself some rennet cheese. Do exactly what you did before. Just add some rennet and see how you get on. And you will see that you should get a little more texture into that curd. Okay, so we are now in a position. Oh, lastly, did you do your baked camembert? Who did baked camembert this week? Oh, you see, I'm seeing smiles there. It's a nice one, isn't it? Couldn't be easier. Easy. Did you flavor it? Do you know what flavor there?
White wine and
white wine.
Yeah, white wine and garlic.
And lemon thyme I used.
Lemon thyme, interesting. Timmy, did you have some? Did you give it a go?
I use like white wine vinegar.
Oh, white wine vinegar.
Yeah.
Was it nice?
It tastes like a little bit like a little bit like too much acid in there. Maybe I put too much or something, and I'm not sure.
I'm not sure white wine vinegar was the way to go. But thank you for doing that on behalf of myself, Claire, and Christian, so we don't have it. So try it with just some regular white wine, or it doesn't work well with red wine, by the way. That's another one you guys don't need to try. Okay, so session 3. We are now going to head into preparation for affinage. Very exciting. I'm going to share my screen.
Do we need to keep the cheese we've made anymore?
No, you can toss it now.
Right.
You can toss it now. Yes, please do dispose of it in a responsible way, or feed it to your dog, or if you do that kind of thing. My dog certainly would. Right, share screen. Okay, what we're going to talk about is preparation for affinage. Okay, affinage is the process of taking a cheese beyond its make. We've made it in the cheese rooms, the dairy. It's a soft make, a hard make, a crumbly make, or a hard cooked make. But now we're going to take it on. Now, the split in terms of affinage between who the cheesemaker does it, or perhaps an affineur, someone who does it, is entirely local. It depends on who you are, what you do, and it could be done anyway. But the point is, we're taking curd and doing something funky with it. And we're going to talk for a little bit about preparing cheese for using cultures to ripen cheese. So you remember from the first session, we talked about ripening cultures. The 3 main families of ripening cultures are they on the tip of our tongue?
Mold, yeast, bacterium.
Awesome. Mold, yeast, and bacteria. Those are the ripening cultures. All of those cultures are alive. Enzymes, remember, are not alive. All those 3 will use enzymes, but our delivery agents are our ripening cultures: yeasts, molds, and bacteria. But the ones that we want don't always want to live in the curd that we've built. Now, a reminder from last week, you will remember we talked about acidity being one of the controls that we use to limit pathogens, the beasties we do not like. Okay, so we have taken our cheese down to the isoelectric point, 4.2, 4.6, 4.8, that kind of area, and yeasts, molds, and bacteria do not like that. They won't live there. Why? Because we wanted them not to be able to live. We want to use acidity as a health control, and that is being valued. But if we want ripening cultures to come to our aid now, we're going to have to do something about that acidity. So let's kick on, and find out what we can do. So let's first look at some ripening cultures. Those are the 4. Let's go back to them one at a time. Okay, what ripening culture do you think we're using there, Christian?
Not sure.
That is, well, do you want to see if we can guess at the cheese?
Well, we got some beautiful, what we got here, some camembert, some brie.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's probably, I'm guessing at the ratio of width to height, it's probably a brie, not a camembert, but you do get camemberts out of that thing, but I think we can be confident this is a brie. And a brie uses the white external mold called penicillium. It actually has 2 names. Camemberti or candidum, both are valid names. In the Academy of Cheese, we tend to use the word candidum, but in the outside world, people will use either. They tend
on that note, yeah, if you don't mind, just for 1 second, please. On that note, so just one thing I'm a little confused about is on the delegate pack you sent over on Thursday or Friday, right? Now, we also have access to the online work, right? Now, all the different molds, bacteria, all the different kinds of sheep, goat, cows, to remember, are they found in a certain PDF document or pack, or is that all online?
So the easiest thing, I mean, I did the, you remember in the first session, I sent through on an email my glossary, which the glossary has within it, and we could pick out just the elements that look at these ripening cultures. That might be a valid thing to do, actually. I might write that down just to see if I can get the ripening cultures into one document. It does contain the ripening cultures. Well, we'll talk about them today, but please, Christian, at no point think there is such a thing as a dumb question or you want to recap. We really must make sure that we sort of feel comfortable with these terms. So let's think about molds to begin with, okay? All the molds that we need to know at level 2 for ripening begin with the word penicillium, okay? So if it's a penicillium, it's a mold. There are other molds, but we don't use them for ripening. And the only 2 that are of any importance to us are Penicillium camemberti or Penicillium candidum. They are interchangeable. Most people use candidum, but camemberti is very common. I like camemberti because that reminds me of cheese. And Penicillium roqueforti. Those are our 2 ripening molds, okay? You can use both on the outside. Penicillium roqueforti can also be used on the inside of a cheese. So that is our ripening cultures. Okay, so let's go through these. That one there is a washed rind cheese, otherwise known as bacteria ripened. Okay, so our culture, our ripening culture at this occasion is a bacteria. Now, there is a type of bacteria that people always reach for and say, washed rind is Brevibacterium linens. Okay, now that is in your notes and it's quoted in the Learning Road, and it is seen as the dominant bacteria for ripening cheese. I'm going to come back to that a bit later because it turns out it's not quite so simple, but it gets so complicated so quickly they haven't even bothered to name all the others. But but it's worth remembering Brevibacterium linens. So that's a ripening culture there. Here we have cultures on the top, but it's not planned. This is what we call wild cultures, or the biome of the maturing room. And this is where you've got a cellar or a maturing room or a cave or something like that, where there are a lot of wild cultures. These are not coming off a Petri dish. They have not been developed in a laboratory. They have not been selected, and they probably haven't even been identified. They're just what's ever there at the time. But you can see that mottled look, the discoloration, combination of browns, blacks, oranges. There's actually some whites in there as well. Now, these are cultures, sorry, these are molds and yeasts, maybe even a few bacteria in there, but mostly molds and yeast that have just turned up looking for a free lunch, okay? And they're sitting on there, and they do have an impact. And every cellar or cave or ripening room will have its own version. And we will get to cheese with these sometimes called natural rinds. We'll get to cheeses when we're going to look at them, and they're sort of quite distinctive because they're often dominated by what you might call mud or concrete colors, grays. Now here, this is a Stilton. Now on this occasion, we have been quite deliberately activating molds and yeasts. The difference between these two cheeses, as in the curd underlying these two cheeses, is Stilton's a crumbly cheese. You'll remember that's a much higher moisture level than a hard cheese. And so the molds are going to be much more active on here. There's a lot more to eat. So we're getting quite a lot of yeasts and molds growing on there, and they form a unique and deliberate rind. That top one, the cheddar, has cloth on there. So the yeasts and molds that are sitting on that cloth are a very small part of its journey. Some, but some small. Whereas the rind, the natural rind that's growing on that Stilton is a very important. The rind itself is made up of the yeasts and the molds and their interaction to make that hard excess of cheese, that rind of cheese. So let's just get this into our heads. We are using live organisms, mostly yeasts and molds, sometimes bacteria, to form a coat around the cheese that to a greater or lesser extent consumes and digests the cheese. You could say it's another type of fermentation. And it's sometimes called secondary fermentation, which is a sort of phrase, Christian, you'll know from winemaking, like champagne and that kind of thing. So we've reintroduced more live cultures, and now they're going to have a second crack at this cheese, and they're going to take the curd and do something new with it. Does that make sense? Okay, now to make this happen, we're going to see if we can, we'll just have some more here. So we'll start getting into a few more cheeses. Now, we're going to try and name any of these cheeses, and then we're going to look at what the ripening culture is doing. So anybody want to see if they can name any of those cheeses or identify some characteristic of the cheese, like maybe what the milk is or what it may be the cheese is inspired by in terms of.
The one at the bottom, is that an Emmentaler?
It's an Emmentaler, that's exactly right. This is the one that Christian was at last week. He had nice, I think you, go ahead.
Yeah, that looks like the 18 pounds of Emmentaler I have in my fridge. It's about the same veg.
You don't want that big. Yeah, that is big. You described, I thought it was a nice phrase, you described the holes as being like cherries. And you can see that in the body of that cheese, they are cherry-like, nice, big, round. We've got some very much smaller holes towards the edge, and Claire was demonstrating on the Mayfield that the Mayfield is sort of dominated by not an even distribution of holes and dominated by irregularly shaped smaller holes, which can give us a slightly eggy or negative smell or taste around it. So what's our ripening culture doing there?
That's creating carbon dioxide.
Yeah, which is delivering our holes, next, anybody got another one off here?
The Gorgonzola, top left.
It's not Gorgonzola. It's a good guess though. It's round.
It's like the goat cheese, right, on the top left. It's a little bit white.
Yeah. Do you mean top right? This one?
Top left, top left and top right also. I think the right and the left is the goat one.
Can you see my mouse? I'm never sure if you can see my mouse.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one.
Yeah. This one I think it's goat. Yeah, this round should be like goat blue cheese, right?
It's not a goat's cheese. That is a Stilton.
Ah.
So what we've got there, it's I have to say this one is going to gives it so clearly, but I often think of the way of describing a Stilton style mold pattern as a bit like a spider web. This is more like a sort of someone's thrown paint against the wall kind of look, but they're generally closed curds, and the blue forms sort of look like a blue line drawing on the cheese rather than having little holes. We will come across ones like Roquefort or Bleu de Verne where they create little caverns, little sort of open spaces inside the cheese that are fully sort of decorated in mold. It's like they've got mold wallpaper on the inside of these holes. And you can see it slightly there, but that's unusual in Stilton. So Stilton is round. So what about this chap in the middle at the top here?
Is that more of your Camembert?
It is your Camembert. You can see quite distinctly that it's ripened quite heavily in this area here. Now we're going to talk about the difference between a lactic and a rennet ferment. This is a lactic ferment, so we've got a very firm, crumbly center and a very liquid outside, which is typical of what happens when you put Camembert against an acidic, an acid or a lactic fermentation, or correctly.
Charlie, would you say that's an example of what they call a slipped rind, or is it just? Okay.
No, yeah, slip coat. We do actually explicitly address it next week, so let's leave that until next week. That is a thing, and it is part of the syllabus. So we'll pick that up when the thing about slip coat is it's thought to be a flaw, as in people think it's a negative outcome of bad cheese making, and that's, I wouldn't say it's controversial. It's just some people really like it, so it's a characteristic. But yes, you could argue that that's got slip coat. But it's a good opportunity. Anyway, I think we'll put past them. So that is probably a lactic thing, something like a chorse. I don't know if anybody knows the chorse, where you get this very gooey edge and then a firmer center. What about this one on the right?
Geotrichum?
A geotrichum. Geotrichum candidum. It's got the same secondary name as the Penicillium candidum. And the geotrichum has this distinctive vermiculated, I always think of it as the surface of Mars kind of topography, lots of little sort of rivulets or whatever, very distinctive color, and it's a yeast. This is a yeast. What about this chap on the bottom left? Anybody recognize it?
Looks kind of similar to Taleggio.
Oh, no, it is Taleggio. You've nailed it. Absolutely right. Okay. That is Taleggio. You can see it's Taleggio, apart from the fact you said it looks like it. But can you see those round circles on the top with a T? It's sort of upside down T. If you look at it, that's T for Taleggio. It's generally dominated by a very distinctive orangey color, often with bits of blue in the sort of striations, those lines that run across the top. Blue is Penicillium Roqueforti, the same as in our Stilton, but the orange is from the washed rind. So we've got a bacterial culture giving that culture. So looking at those, the top three are, well, we've got a mold, yeast, bacteria with mold, and bacteria in our cultures. So the bacteria are making the holes, the yeast is making that vermiculation in the top right-hand corner, the bacteria ripening on the Taleggio with a little bit of coloring up from the blue molds, which is not that, you can just about see it on this cheese. So that's what we're aiming towards, but let's look at these one by one. Penicillium Roqueforti. This is a slide, actually, I think, in your packs. So I think we're already there, Christian, having said that we need to do something for you. But this is a slide in what I sent to you on level 1. If it's not there, give me a shout and I'll make sure it's added in, but I'm pretty confident. So Penicillium Roqueforti, Penicillium Camemberti, candidum, also known as P. Camemberti, Geotrichum candidum, Brevibacterium linens, and propionic bacteria. Propionic means gas producing. So bunch of them fall under this category. So those are our 5 ripening culture families that we have to be aware of. Some are specific. Roqueforti is specific, but there are sub-strains. if you ever get the chance to visit the town of Rock 40 and go and meet, say, the Societe cave people, they will talk to you about having different Rock 40 strains in different parts of their caves. So you can get substrains within the, actually in today's language, maybe we should call them variants, like COVID. We've got a variant of Penicillium Rock 40. Going to the Brevibacterium linens, it says here, and correctly so, understanding is changing. Rinds of these cheeses are known to be made up of a diverse range of organisms rather than a single species. To the point, there is actually a cheese called Gubbeen. Claire might be aware of it.
Yeah.
Up on the coast of Ireland. It's a washed rind cheese, to the point where they tested that one and found there was a completely unknown species to science of bacteria. They've named it the Gubbinese. It's now called the Gubbinese, and that is what you find on the Gubbeen washed rind cheese. So quite a lot going on in those. Could be quite complicated little communities of bacteria, and it's not just that they are in different ratios. It is understood and well known now that you will get different ratios of your bacteria depending on when in the maturation process. So at the beginning, you might have this ratio of bacteria, and then after a week or so, or 3 or 4 weeks, when it's dried out a bit and you've had a bit more time, blah, blah, you get different, more slow growing ones that become dominant. So we are not expected to know the ins and outs of all these things, but we are expected to know there are these 5 families that we use in maturing cheese: the Rock 40s, the blues, the candidums, the Penicillium candidums, the whites on the outside, the geotrichum yeasts, the bacterial family, bacteria ripening, dominated by Brevibacterium linens, and the propionic family, which makes bubbles.
Can I just ask, Charlie, people talk about Rock 40 being caused by copper wires. Where did that come from, that theory?
It's never caused by copper wires.
No.
Okay.
They seem to think
So to reach back into the mists of time, there is a lovely little anecdotal story. I'm going to get rid of this because I don't like looking at small people. Back to people. So many, many years ago, in the caves of Rockford, there was a young shepherd boy who was having a sandwich. Okay. And he had some sheep's cheese in his sandwich, and he was just resting in the rain, in the mists, and under cover of his cave. And the Maid of Auvergne, which is this diaphanous figure of myth and beauty, goes past. You know, she's a goddess or a nymph or something like that, and she goes past. And being a Frenchman, he falls in love instantly, and he follows her, and he kind of and he follows her for a month. And being a Frenchman, it's unrequited and tragic, and many poems are written about it, and you know they all end badly. And he makes his way back to his cave, and he discovers that his sandwich now has become blue. The cheese has become blue. And it's from this that the French people discover the wonderful properties of blue mold in cheese. And that is the story of how blue first got into to cheese, which is complete bollocks. Obviously, there is no Maid of Auvergne, but fact, to get blue mold into cheese in the old days, they used to take whole loaves, put them into the caves, allow them to become consumed, dry the loaf, completely immersed, grind it into a powder, and then spread the powder over the curd before they assembled the curd into the shapes of the cheese. So, yes, bread was used in the old days to bring in. We touch on this, I think, in the 2 sessions time when we talk about the possibility of celiacs not being able to eat cheese, and this is where this comes from. But we no longer get Penicillium Rock 40 from bread. Nobody, as far as I'm aware, uses bread in any form to get the mold. But that is where the mold comes from. So why do we put needles in cheese? We put needles in cheese because Penicillium Rock 40 cannot grow without
air.
Air. That's right. The needles are the passageways of air. They've got nothing to do with the mold itself. They don't inject it, they don't carry it, you don't dip your needle in blue mold to put it in there. At least I'm not aware of anybody has doing that now or has ever done that. Maybe someone did it once, I don't know. But so the needles are all about, and use of, you said copper or brass needles.
Yeah.
It's simply because those were more available, very expensive, but more available in the old days and very easy to clean. So that is just historic use of those type of needles. They have slight antibacterial properties, which is why even now you get a lot of the cauldrons that make the cheeses of Europe, whether they're Parmesan or Grana Padano or Osserati or whatever, will often use copper-lined vats. A secondary property of transmitting heat very evenly around the whole of it, which is very important. You don't want hot spots in the making of your cheese. So do needles inject blue into cheeses? Nope. Okay. Where were we? Back in our sharing screen mode. So we've got our 5 families of ripening cultures. Very exciting. We like them. They're going to do funky stuff, but we need to do a little bit of work on how they do it. All right. Okay. First thing we've got to do, we've got to set this cheese up so that it's a friendly environment for these ripening cultures, because we've deliberately taken them down to a low pH, a high acidity environment. None of these molds or yeasts want to go there, so we've got to get it. We've got to move them up. So first, LAB active. pH is at its lowest when the curd is formed. This is too acidic for our ripening culture friends. We need to get in there and sort that out for them. So salting is critically important. In this session, salt is our friend, right? We discussed that it's a preservative. Fine, everyone talked about that. We talked about last week. It makes the ambient water level lower by trapping the water away from the bacteria. But this week, we're talking about it being critical for flavor. And now we're talking about it stopping further acid production. We know why, because it's trapping the water and stopping the bacteria from doing their thing. But this process of calling a halt to acid production is a critical part of the process. It's in real terms, this is the line between the make and the post make. We've taken it up using bacteria to ripen and create curd. Stop, bell rung, salt on, end of that game. Okay, we're not doing it anymore. We're now moving into post make area. So our cheese has been made. Now, there are NSLAB, boring letters, okay? Salt-resistant, non-starter lactic acid bacteria, okay? These are lactic acid bacteria that have been introduced to the milk before we made cheese. They could have come from the udder, they could have come from the pastures, they could have come from lots of different places, but they're there by accident. And they could be salt-resistant, okay? Which means they could go on creating acidity past the moment of salting, which is a bummer. We don't want that, okay? That's kind of blowing our system out of the water a bit. And it can bring in defects, including sour and bitter flavors, okay? So we don't really like it. So there is a way around this. It's not a perfect environment. It's not a guarantee we're going to get what we want. But for the most part, salting brings an end to lactic acid production. Okay, so right now though, although we've made our cheese, it is still low in pH, high in acidity. So we've got to do something. So the rind is too low for pH for ripening cultures. And here we go, bum, bum, bum. Yeasts lower the acidity on the rind. So we're gonna bring in a fixer. He's gonna be a yeast and he's there purely to lower the acidity or raise the pH on the rind. And we call these hastening rooms. And with culture, so I suppose you could argue it's a ripening culture, but it's kind of like a pre-ripening culture. We're going to get ready to prepare, we're preparing the rinds for our ripening cultures. And to give an example, Camemberti, Penicillium Camemberti needs a 5.2 to 5.4 pH. So we've got to bring it up about 1 pH. And we're going to use yeasts to do this. So we're going to take our curd and we're going to raise it a bit. We're going to raise it a bit. We're going to raise that skin. Yeast is also important for blue cheeses. Now, the ripening cultures, enzymes from the ripening cultures are actually going to do the heavy lifting here. The ripening cultures there are just our way of getting those enzymes into the cheese. And they break down proteins and fats to boost the flavors and textures that we want. So it takes our camembert, for instance, a sort of a vaguely firm, vaguely hockey puck, vaguely crumbly type event, into the gooey, lovely thing that we all know and love, and we like to add white wine vinegar, maybe we don't, to make it super tasty. Okay, quite a lot going on there, okay? But we're beginning to piece together the bridges between one stage of the process and another. So let's remind ourselves what we're saying here. During cheese making, we're using lactic acid bacteria to create acidity that's making it safe, because we need low acidity to kill off those pathogens, but it's also coagulating the curd. Very important, liking both of those things. Calling a halt to that, throw the salt in, stop the bacteria, but now we have a low pH, high acidity cheese that isn't good for our ripening culture, so we need to bring them back, coax them back to the light side. We're going to use yeasts to do this in hastening rooms to allow our ripening cultures to do their wild thing. With the they're going to inject little enzymes into the cheese and break down to get the curd structure we're looking for. Generally smoother, generally more savory, generally tasty. Have we got any questions on that? There's quite a lot going on this slide. Okay, I'm taking silence as being awesome. I'm going to add one more thing in there. Christian, you specifically look like you're totally on top of this, which is great. Okay, so we're just going to quickly talk about, in a tiny little box that sounds really unimportant, about two nasty chemical sounding words, proteolysis and lipolysis. Proteins, nice and easy. Lipo or lipo, everyone knows about liposuction. Lipids, these are fats. So one's proteins and one's fats. This is the process of breaking down proteins or breaking down fats into tasty things. And the tasty things we're looking for are amino acids or fatty acids. And this is what brings flavor, the magic of flavor. This is what we do when we make interesting cheeses. All this stuff is leading to something that's good for us, that's tasty. And amino acids and fatty acids are where it's at. Now we're dipping in and dipping out of proper chemistry here. We're not going all the way, but some of this stuff we need to know. Acidity, salting, using carrier agents, our ripening cultures, our yeasts and our bacteria and our molds, to lead to this moment of enzymes breaking down proteins and fats into tastiness, amino acids and fatty acids. Right, that's one of the things you just have to chew on, which means it must be a cheese break. Okay, have you guys, you've got halloumi. We're not gonna do that one, that texture is quite unusual, so but you did have a goat's cheese, I think. Christian, you got a goat's cheese?
Yeah.
Timmy, you've got a goat's cheese?
Let me see.
I'm really confident you have. You showed me one, it's got white mold going around the outside.
I know, pasture, like they have like cow, goat, and sheep. They're like three of the milk.
Okay, just show them up, bring up to the screen so I can see where you're at. No, not that one. The round one.
The round one. The goat sheep, like this one.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. You and me, Claire, we're going to do the salsa share. This wasn't what I wanted us to have, but it is a delicious cheese, so that's okay then. I think Christian's got a good bit of cheese, so he should be all right. So are you ready to go back into your room? What I want you to do here is pay attention to two specific characteristics. Okay, one is whether your cheese has two textures. All right, Claire, yours and mine. Mine's, can you see it's got a sort of second texture just under the rind?
Yep. Yeah.
And Timmy, you should have also, although yours might be a bit easier to spot than Claire's and mine. Christian obviously is having a trouble, so let's just.
What cheese do you want me to do?
Go back. You've got one. You've got a goat's cheese, I think, Christian.
Yeah, you're good with that? Okay, let me get it. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. So Claire, yours and mine, if you assume you've got the other half of mine, which I'm assuming,
Yeah.
you can really see that vermiculated rind on there. Come on, you can focus, Mr. Camera. Come on, focus. There we go. There we go. Very good example. What's interesting is that actually on the other side, it doesn't at all look subvermiculated, much more dominated with Penicillium camembert here. I don't know how that snuck on, but there you go. Okay, interesting.
It's interesting as well. It's quite sort of thick round the sort of the edge. It's sort of like sunk in at the side, and that's quite firm.
He's I know he looks like a young cheese, but he's like old before his time.
Yeah.
Right, so what I want you to pay attention to is the body of the cheese, the texture, both what it looks like, its mouthfeel, and the way it the way it tastes outside the mouth and inside the mouth, but texture-wise, not the flavor.
Yeah.
Visually what it looks like. And I want you to taste the it's a bit more difficult for us, Claire, because it's quite narrow, but the bit that's broken down underneath the rind, separately from the main cheese. See if you can get a different flavor of it.
Thanks.
All right. Okay, as always, do your observations before you taste anything. And please talk to each other. If it's interesting to you, say it out loud and discuss it and see if other people have got a similar or often more interesting, different experience. All right, are you ready to go to your rooms? I will see you shortly. Interesting little cheeses. So Claire's was a geotrichum, Christian and Timmy's were candidum. Is that right? I don't think I actually saw it. Yep. Christian, could you just lift yours up for the camera so I can see? Or have you done that thing you keep doing, like eating it already? Okay. What kind? I can't really see what kind of rind that is.
Well, there is no rind.
Oh, no rind at all. Cool. Okay. Then we've got three. We've got a fresh one there. We've got a mold ripened, and we've got a yeast ripened. 3 different expressions of goat's cheese. But my guess is that all of these are acidic dominant coagulation. Yeah. Okay, so Kristen did the last one. Timmy, you are up. Explain your observations on your cheese, please.
Yeah, this one I can see the sign of the PGI. The name is Chaplet from Holland. It's made from goat. I think it's pasteurized and also vegetarian rennet. The make is crumbly. Post make should be wrapped, right? I'm not sure. That should be round with 3 inches tall, and then they said they write down like the big one. It's around 4.5 kilo for this one.
Okay, big.
They have like rind, yellow rind with the inorganic outer, also with the plastic cover for this one.
Can you lift it up the camera for me to see?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is a Gouda.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah, that is a Gouda. Can we have that?
They said like chevret.
Chevret. So
yeah.
chevret is it's a French word, but it's sort of widely used to denote goat cheese because chevret is goat. Can you bring it up right up to the screen? Okay, so you can see that distinct. Last week we talked about Goudas, that distinct sort of shouldered cheese. Do you see what I mean? So 4.5 kilos is going to be about right. So it's going to be a big cheese like this, flat bottom, Gouda, round side. I misunderstood what cheese you had there, but that is interesting. It's a hard cheese. It's not a fresh or soft cheese. Can be extremely tasty though. Goat's cheese really responds to being a Gouda. I like goat's Goudas quite a lot.
And then this one, the texture I give like 6 or 7. Mm-hmm. There's no sign of blue. Smell I give like around 3 for this one.
All right. Claire, can we move in on your cheese?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what your observations are.
So this cheese is called Zeltershire. It's a small, round, unpasteurized goat's cheese. Oops, sorry, I'm getting error messages here. Hold on. Take that off. So would have been, well, about that big when it was whole. It's got quite a distinctive look to it because it's got this really dark, sort of almost black, dark grey rind, contrasting with the sort of ivory coloured sort of interior. So it's quite distinctive looking. We've already talked about the geotrichum, very vermiculated on one side and smoother sort of on the other. The rind is really interesting because it almost seems to have, I was breaking bits off, filaments to it. Because I couldn't work if it was a ash or not. But there's almost like, I don't know whether you can probably get this or not.
Yeah, I can see what you're looking at. It's almost, I don't, you know, would you know any sort of like an asbestos or a carbon fiber kind of fineness to it, almost like cloth?
Yeah.
It has got ash. Yes, this rind, which is predominantly yeast, would be white without the colouring, and the colouring comes from the rind, so from the ash. So the ash.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So where are we? So in looking at the textures, you've obviously got just under the rind, you've got that sort of breakdown. So it's a very sort of soft and sort of all not quite runny, but sort of getting towards there. And the colour change to a more chalky interior. So you definitely got sort of two tones there. No sign of any bluing at all. And then sort of got quite a sort of lactic dairy smell to it. Nothing, very pleasant.
Okay, I want to focus in on. I'm just going to turn my light on, see if I can get a more. So on that cheese you've got going on there, I don't know if you can spotlight my video so that you can see what I'm looking at here. Right, you can focus, you can, my friend, come on, focus. Can you see it's got a slightly fluffy character to it? Can you see that? Sorry, it really is, it's struggling to focus here. So this very slightly fluffy character is typical of an acid set. It's a nuance that's quite difficult to spot in some ways, but it's once you get to know it, and I don't think it's part of level 2, but it's there to be seen, and it's definitely worth learning as we're learning about the different types of set. This kind of crumbliness is acidic, and if it had been the center of, say, a camembert, it would not have had this very lightly fluffiness. Claire, I don't know what your eyes are like. Obviously, you've got your glasses out, and
yeah, it doesn't seem quite. I can really see those sort of. I don't know whether mine's going to focus. These sort of hairy filaments, though.
In the main body of the cheese.
It coming down from the rind, and then also sticking up on the top as well.
So, Christian, can you bring up your cheese and either break it or cut it? And let's.
I did cut it already.
Yeah, that'll do. That's
just good enough for.
So I'm just going to pin your. So can you see, as you cut it across? Some people describe it as if you run your thumb or a finger over a tennis ball the wrong way, it makes it fluff up. Does that make sense? If you cut that cheese, can you see that it sort of fluffs up in a slightly similar way? Does that make sense?
It does actually. I mean, I'm using a fork to do that, you know. But yeah, oh. Interesting.
it's worth paying. I mean, it's just giving a visual representation of what an acid set curd does. So this one that Claire and I've got is slightly older, it's firmer, it's less moisture than the one that you've got, but the structure itself is broadly the same inside the curd. Timmy's is different. I've got the wrong end of the stick with his cheese there. His is very much a Gouda, which means it's getting a rennet set curd, so it doesn't have that kind of structure. But we can tell that. Have you opened the Wigmore at all, Claire?
Yeah.
What other cheeses have you got there, Christian?
So I got feta, I got halloumi.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I think for goat's cheeses, that would be it for now.
Okay. The Wigmore that I've got here is very gooey. It's going to be
It's very gooey.
yeah, it's going to be extremely tasty, but it's not going to retain any of the character we just talked about. It's going to be very nice, actually. I look forward to this. All right. Okay, so let's move towards our, just do some, we've all got quite different cheeses, but let's just highlight our key flavor outcomes. Timmy, you go first. You've got a goat's milk Gouda. What are your key flavor outcomes?
My key flavor outcome is like savory and also like the acidic. For this one, I get like 5 from both and then move out to 6 and then drop down. It also has sweetness, but not that much as the acid. Not much saltiness and cannot detect the bitterness for this one.
Okay. Any complex flavors worth bringing to the attention of the table?
Complex flavor, I can detect the goat milk like flavor and also the floral and the fruitiness for this one.
I think
a little bit nutty, like saltiness for this one.
Are you
That's all
enjoying
I
it?
got.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like
Yeah, it's very nice.
Cool. Christian, your headlines?
So for the simple flavors, definitely acidity. That was definitely the biggest one. I think that did give it a little bit of a low mark. I started off with a 5, going up to a 6 and going down to a 4. But I almost feel like it can do a little bit more on the acid.
Okay.
I definitely not bitter. Sweet, I also given it a 0. And then I given it a little salty from 2 up to a 3 and down to a 1. And I don't know, I just put there for savory, and I think I should give it more for savory, considering that goat milk belongs to the savory family, right? Well, would you put this towards there? I give it really low on savory.
How does it compare to the cheese you made yourself? Oh, you haven't made one yet, have you? Save a little bit for when you compare it to the cheese you're going to make, because it's going to be interesting to see how it compares to that. Any complex notes?
Yeah, for complex notes, I given it on the dairy. I given it 4, going up to 5 and down to 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I given it for the last one, animal, what is that, fungal fermented. I given it a 5 because it feels like a bit like farmyard to me.
Mm-hmm.
A bit more like this farmyard, this goat. It's almost like you're sucking on a goat there for a minute, you know?
Okay, there is. Yeah, no, you're not selling that cheese. But it's an interesting, because people do. People do talk about goatiness and farmyardiness as if they're the same. They're not quite the same. There's a kind of like but farmyard is quite a broad church. You have kind of dry farmyards, wet farmyards, in the barns, out amongst the cow shit. You know, it's sort of a range of, but goatiness is quite specific, and most people immediately recognize it, going, you know, a bit like saying you're sucking on the goat, which is interesting.
Where would you put it you put this under dairy, or you put this towards your animal below?
I would
you-
go down the dairy. I would go down the animal. Sorry, I think it's a goat
Animal.
is an animal thing.
Yeah.
It falls into a category that people have very varying responses to. So I'm a mid-range for goatiness. Some people, around 1 in 20, are hypersensitive to goat's milk and don't like it at all. And really, you can lie through your teeth and say there is no goat in something, and they will still spot it, even if they sort of don't know what it is. But there are a few people who think they don't like goat's milk, and actually they just don't like badly made goat's milk cheese, and actually give them a good one, and they are okay with it. But as I said, some people really sensitive to it. So I don't know about Timmy or Claire, whether you are goat's milk sensitive. You like goat's milk cheeses?
Yeah, I like them. But...
Yeah, nice one.
Claire, I'm quite enjoying this. It's got
it grows on you, I think.
Yeah, it's got a strong, it's got a bit of fruitiness that both Timmy and Christian are talking about. And although it's quite drying, and it's a good example of a drying cheese, this one, it unlocks your taste buds quite quickly, and you get some nice sort of spiky savouriness, the sweetness of the goat's milk coming through, and then a sort of, well, it has a really nice sort of a sweet sort of spike there. I rather want to. Oh, good.
It's got a sort of mushroomy tone to it as well, I thought.
Coming off the rind. It's all off the rind there. It's good. Okay, good job. So goat's milk, not for everybody, but lots of people love it very much. Oh, I've got thunder going on here. Right. So we have looked at ripening cultures, and now we're going to look at a bit more detail at washed rind cultures. Now, we're not going to taste washed rind this week. We're tasting it in future weeks. But we're going to look at it. Okay, so we looked at how we prep a surface for ripening cultures. And the first ripening culture that we're going to put on there is going to be a washed rind for our curiosity. Washed rind, you will remember, is also known as bacteria ripened. So let's have a look. We're looking for bacteria ripening cultures. They are salt tolerant because we're going to have salt knocking around. We have pre-salted this cheese. And why? It's to break down the taste, and for some alpines, it's to create a rind. There is a small sub-genre of washed rind cheeses. And I think it's annoying because they really distract us from what washed rind is about, but we're going to have to touch on them. So we'll start here. The cheeses like Reblochon, sorry, bad example, raclette, which I think Timmy had last week, but Gruyères and that kind of thing, they have a washed rind mold, and it's all about creating a rind. Now, the thing about washed rind is to get bacteria going, we've got to create a bacteria-friendly environment. And bacteria likes wetness, it likes high temperature, and it likes a low pH, sorry, a high pH, a low acidity, all of which could cause bacteria of any kind to turn up. So you need to get your bacteria on there pretty damn quick. Otherwise, somebody's going to take them and dominate it. You want to get yours to outcompete everyone else. So we wash the rind to raise the pH, drop the as an alternative to using yeasts in the previous slide. We're going to raise the temperature, we're going to raise the humidity, and get wetness. And that humidity is there through the wash. But we can use more than water. There's quite a lot of options with washing rinds. Most common version is to use salty water and salt the cheese at the same time. So we conflate two processes. The process of finishing up on the make, where we stop the lactic acid bacteria producing more lactic acid by swamping it with salt, and then we prep it for the process of ripening cultures. So salt and water. The salt stops the last process, the water gets ready for the next process. That's the most common one. But we can add other things, alcohol, we can have other bacteria in that can do funky stuff like bring flavors, or we can add herbs. There are washing rinds that have ciders in. There are all sorts of, or whatever it's called, stinking bishop, for instance, is washed. Berry. So we can wash with a whole bunch of things and use it. Epoisse, probably the smelliest cheese of all, is washed with an addition of Marc de Bourgogne, which is a kind of spirit. which is made from the lees of Burgundy grapes and is very powerful. It's an eau de vie. So we can use this moment actually to bring in quite a lot of stuff. But the key thing that we're achieving is usually salting to end the lactic acid, ending the mate process, and the water to prep the rind for further development through ripening cultures. So which ripening cultures? Brevibacterium linens, Christian, that's the sort of the main event. But there's Arthobacters, there's other Microbacterium, there's Coagules negative Staphylococci. Does anybody remember us meeting a Coagules positive Staphylococci? We met that last week. Do you remember that one? That was one of our pathogens. It's a nasty word, Coagules negative, Coagules positive. I mean, who remembers such things? Fortunately, you don't have to, because you can take the exam with all these things at your fingertips written down if you do prep right. But those are the kind of things that we can have. So who washes what? We can wash all soft cheeses. They like being washed. Hard cheeses, yes, there are a very few hard cheeses washed. Raclette, previously mentioned, is an example. Morbier is another one. There's not that many, but there are some. And Alpines, but that's this business of creating a particular rind. Sometimes the phrase smear ripened might have come across your desk, and that's how we transfer the bacteria from one cheese to another by smearing some, taking off one, like a bit like taking Marmite off one piece of toast and trying to smear it on the next one. But we must be aware that encouraging bacteria may encourage pathogens. This is considered to be quite a tricky or dangerous process, and environmental health people don't like this. But actually, because you are nailing it with so much bacteria you can outcompete nasty bacteria. So generally, it's not as dangerous as it looks. But that's because you've got a lot of friendly bacteria on your side. So rind wash is bacteria ripened. That's what we do. That's what we do. Okay. Right. Maturing and ripening versus storage. Okay. Now, this is this business of getting into, can you just bung anything in your fridge and it works? It turns out not quite so much. The actual temperature matters. So we're just going to have a quick look at temperature banding and who uses what. Okay. So ordinary storage, you, me, the man next door, we use fridges, and fridges globally are fixed at between 2 and 8 degrees. So every fridge that's a domestic or set fridge will be using between 2 and 8 degrees. Now, for reasons of caution, you might say, most fridges are set to below 8 because temperature can rise when you open the door and stuff like that. So they tend to be set to 2 to 5 so that it never goes above 8 to make sure it stays below 8. So you sort of keep it low to give yourself a bit of a buffer. So that's your domestic fridges, your commercial fridges, the whole bag uses this 2 to 8 bracket. Inside that 2 to 8 zone, your intention is things not to change. Okay, the 2 to 8 is there to hold in stasis. Now, you cannot hold anything that is alive in stasis forever. You can try and freeze it, but those aren't freezing temperatures. Those are 2 to 8, so it's above freezing. So most organisms will go very, very slowly at that temperature, and they won't stop. So that's something to bear in mind, that 2 to 8, which means like even in the fridge, your cottage cheese or whatever it is, it goes off eventually, but it gives you extra time. So who uses simple storage? Well, everybody. Your transport, your chill chain, most retailers, restaurants, consumers, the lorry that delivers stuff to your door, if it's got a fridge in it, 2 to 8 is what we all use. And as I said, most businesses operate at 2 to 5 to give themselves a buffer. That is ordinary storage, simple storage, everyday storage. But if we are cheesemakers, we might want bacterial activity or mold activity. So let's have a look at sort of what we're doing in those areas. You could call this complex or professional storage or whatever you like, really. But here we have maturers and affinage, and they can use any temperature they like, any temperature they like. Why? Because they've got a test to make sure they're not doing anybody any harm, and they know what the outcome is going to be. Pardon me. So they must use HACCP. Now, HACCP was part of last week's coverage, but we never got there. So we'll try and pick up on it today, and we'll just think of it as the process of assuring that what you're doing has an outcome you plan. It's how we do that is part of HACCP, but it's the process of knowing what the outcomes are. And so you basically need to prove what you're doing is legit, either by testing or using a process that somebody else has tested. So that's how you are allowed to exit through the gate marked unsafe. You've got to be a professional. 2 to 8, you don't have to do anything. Everybody knows what happens there. Outside 2 to 8, you've got to prove it. So who matures and affineurs? Well, producers do, because they are operating at a wide range of cheeses, of temperatures as part of their production process. Affineurs may well, but affineur is basically just a producer, but who doesn't make cheese. You know, he's just a way of taking the cheese on. He's the second man in the relay. And there are a small number of retailers and in fact restaurants who will do some funky stuff. Most of them do it for fun and slightly keep the door quietly closed on telling their EHO as they're just having a crack for a cheese here and a cheese there. And this is where we like, Christian, your wine fridges, because wine fridges come with a dial that says what temperature you'd like it to be at. So I imagine that in your wine professional world, you've got some wine fridges that you can set to 12 degrees or something like that. Have you got something like that? Those are the kind of fridges that the average punter like me or a cheesemonger likes, because it means we can break the rules, if that makes sense, because the average fridge won't let you do that. So we can do all that, but we do have something, and this is the first time we're going to mention it, something called prerequisites. You can only do this type of storage if you've got your prerequisites covered. And your prerequisites are: you are a good and professional person who does good cleaning, uses clean people, including yourself, to do it. Make sure there are no critters knocking around, no cockroaches, no mice, no something like that. And you look after your kit. No screws falling out of your air conditioning or dribbling onto your cheese making process or something like that. They are basically non-production specific controls that everybody should be doing anyway. And we have this nice name called prerequisites. They're pre-required. Before you even put on your first snood, you must make sure your prerequisites are covered. And every time we talk about a fridge, we assume it's a clean fridge operated by clean people that's away from any pests, and it is maintained. Every time we talk about HACCP and the critical control points, which will come on to the end of the session, we are taking as assumed. It's already stated that it's clean, clean team, pest controlled, and maintained. Okay, these are the bits we shouldn't have to say. So those periods, so that's very important for our ripening and storage. Right, let's go on to some maturing. This gets the fun stuff. This is the kind of stuff we want to do for a living. Okay, when I die, I want to come back as a affineur. So when we're doing our maturing, what levers can we pull? We can pull temperature, humidity, we can turn it, we can brush it, we can wash the cheese, and we can grade the cheeses and taste it to see if which one's going in which direction, so that we can maybe move them around or eat them sooner rather than later. And because managing stock is all about understanding which cheese we've made is delivering which flavor profiles, because they won't all do the same thing. And sending cheeses off as for further this or less of that, or to that customer because that's the way he likes it, is part of that. So this is the kind of thing that when we are maturing, we need to have as controls. So we don't let them happen randomly. We should know what's going on. Plus, of course, the very important factor, time. Time is so important. Time is what happens when we're not watching. Okay, now for the most part, ripening cultures like time, but a whole bunch of things drying out can happen in time, losing moisture, a whole thing. But it's really ripening cultures that's having. And ripening cultures send in their enzymes to do the dirty work, and enzymes take time. So we're going to have a quick look now at time. Now I'm going to leave that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we are going to go and have a look at a whiteboard. Okay. How do I clear that? Anybody know how to clear that?
There's a little rubber button up there right
Oh,
next to
right,
your
found it. It's on the wrong chappy. It's over here. There we go. There we go. Right. So clear all drawings. Marvelous. Okay. So, oh, I'm drawing a line. No, I'm not. Draw. There we go. Axis number 1. Axis number 2. Quality, looking good. And we are going to draw maybe, oh, come back to me. Not brilliantly drawn, but I think you know where I'm at. Right. Are we okay with that? Okay, so this is quality, this is time, that's 1 year, 2 years, so that's 6 months. These are month gradients, don't look very monthly, do they? And I would like you to all to choose cheese. So, Claire, what cheese are you going to choose?
Cheddar.
Cheddar. Christian, what cheese would you like to choose?
Taleggio.
Taleggio. And Timmy, what cheese would you like to choose?
Camembert, right?
Camembert.
Okay.
Perfect. 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 All very good. All right, we're going to start with Claire. Claire, roughly what time do you think cheddar tastes its best?
12 months, 12 to 14
12
months.
months. That'll do. That'll do. So we're going to go roughly around there. Now, at 6 months, what does cheddar taste of?
Puppy.
Not so nice. Okay, so we're going to assume that flavor-wise, cheddar's doing this, okay? Now, at this point, we're going to lose track of what cheddar does as a whole and have to start talking about individual cheddars. Some cheddars could go on getting better. And some cheddars, poor quality cheddars, might do that. And if it's a bag wrapped cheddar, as in not a cloth wrapped cheddar, it might just then sort of go on being much for muchness. Does that make sense? So that's at about 12 months.
What happens though, Charlie, if you turn the temperature down to sort of hold back the cheeses then? So they're still getting older, but the quality's not going to change then, I guess.
Yes, if you take it down a few degrees, then you're going to have less activity by your enzymes. That's definitely true. If you warm it up too much, you're likely to get different outcomes depending on different temperature or moisture areas of your cheese. So temperature is, well, it's going to, let's go to Timmy's camembert on that front. Okay, so does anybody know when camembert gets to be called camembert? So Parmesan is only Parmesan when it's 12 months. Okay, you can't call, if it's less than 12 months, you can't call it. But it's also true for a camembert. Does anybody? The reason I'm stalling is I can't remember exactly, so I'm just gonna. Okay, I can't remember. I think it's 21 days, but I'm not sure. Before that, you can't call it a camembert. I know with a lot of other cheeses, it's 11 days, but it's very, very young anyway. So if this down here is 30 days, a camembert is going to max out it's probably going to get out of date at around 50 days, okay, which is around here. Okay, so we're not going to be able to start at the beginning because you got, so it's going to climb like that. Oh, that's not very good. Okay, absolutely appalling drawing going on here. We'll have one more go and then we'll leave it at that. Come on, Charlie, you can do this. Okay, right. And then it's going to drop down, and then to be absolutely honest, it's heading down there. It goes beyond nice into nasty territory, okay? There are camemberts that don't taste nice. Are we sort of comfortable with what this graph is now trying to achieve? Your Taleggio, Christian, bit more complicated, because actually its journey is pretty similar to a camembert to begin with, but it's a lot more robust post-event. Does that make sense? It tends to become quite rubbery and probably, so I'm going to stick that, but I'm going to go down sort of here. Do you see what I mean? So you've got another maybe month and a half on a Taleggio if you look after it all right. It becomes quite a lot less sensitive to time. Let's think of another couple of cheeses. Let's think of Parmesan. Parmesan, we're going green. I only get to Parmesan at 1 year. And that's still going up. And he'll come down in 6 months' time or something like that. Good Parmesan, 24 months. Any other cheeses? What about a blue cheese? Anyone got a favorite blue cheese?
Stichelton.
Stichelton. Stichelton's a 3-month cheese. I've used blue. We're going to have to go with a different color. Go dark blue, maybe. Now, the thing about Stichelton is it's a blue cheese. Therefore, it requires what to start the blue working?
Air.
Air, which go in the needle. And that, depending on the cheese, is between 2 and 5 weeks. So we're going to start here somewhere, and it's going to peak at around 3 months. Ooh. Now, with blue, it's a kind of preservative. You can go to 6 months, and it might come down like this. Now that's a crumbly cheese. Let's do one last one, something like a Lancashire. It likes being young. It's a cheese that likes being young and can, in theory, go for sort of like that. It depends. This area towards 9 to 12 months will vary on a different cheese. So it could be doing like that, but end earlier. So are we beginning to get an understanding of what time is doing? How you make a cheese is dependent on the outcome you're looking for. The less moisture, the longer it'll last. So each one of these cheeses is dependent on how much moisture it is. So you say you like mozzarella or burrata? Mozzarella burrata just does that. About not even 2 months, I'm exaggerating that. It goes straight down. It's dead in days.
And can you just repeat under what conditions this happens now? This is relating to what temperature? To your fridge temperature or to the temperature kept a bit warmer?
This is typically maturers and makers operate at around 10 to 12 degrees. That is typical of various individual cheese, but you can use as a standard guide 10 to 12 degrees for these cheeses, with the exception on this one of your mozzarella and your burrata, because they are only going downhill. There is no upside for them. They don't ever get better. They only get worse, in which case straight in your fridge, stop it as much as you can. Does that make sense? Allow it to warm for eating. Now, does anybody want to take a picture of that before we move on? Do you want me to put any text on it or anything like that?
Take a picture.
Oh, don't do that. What's? All right. I've played pretty fast and loose on these high numbers here because I've suggested they sort of go up beyond our maximum quality, but quality is quite subjective. The point that I'm making, I think, is reasonably clear. So time's what it's all about. Time is what it's all about. Okay. Back in the room. So in terms of maturation and all that kind of thing, let's look at a little video here. Oh, stop it. Right, quite funky. Let's just go back a bit. That is taken from that place there. That is a cheesemaker called a Gour, A-G-O-U-R. They're in the Pyrenees. They make Osserati cheese. Each cheese is what, 2.5, 3 kilos. It's a sheep's milk cheese on this occasion, and it's also a washed rind cheese. So when they're washing their cheese or keeping their cheese, they are washing with a wet solution. Now, almost all large cheeses require, well, not all, a good number of large hard cheeses that are kept require brushing or washing to make sure that they survive over time. So here's a good example of how that is managed. Each one of these cheeses is on a board, a shelf board, that rather than going across the shelf actually goes into the shelf. So every time they pull off a board, they pull off, was it 4 cheeses? I think it was 4 cheeses. And that cheese is taken off. It's a funky looking machine that washes them and dries them and washes them and turns them and then pops them back on the board. And that's what it goes along. There's a cheesemaker, the only cheesemaker in the UK who uses a machine is a guy called Tom Calver, who makes a cheese called Westcombe Cheddar. And he, actually I tell a lie, there's 2 now. Lincolnshire Poacher now has a machine. But anyway, Tom's is called, sorry?
Florence and Tina.
That's right, Florence the machine. So they know each other, the Joneses who run the Lincolnshire Poacher and Tom Calver, and Tina the Turner is the name of the machine for Westcombe, and Florence and the Machine is obviously another rock band, possibly hasn't made it all the way over to where you are in the Caymans, Christian, or to where Timmy is, but it's an in-joke across the English cheese making scene to name your cheese turning machine after a rock band. But it gives an indication of what people are trying to do. They're trying to control the environment because we are talking about biological processes that benefit from certain temperatures, certain moisture levels, and in some cases just being the right way up. So we need to be in control of those things. Are you okay with that? This is what moisture is about. This is what cheese is about. Okay. And that gives us this sense that we can expect change over time. Now here we have a nice little diagram. This is definitely in your packs. You can print this out. Talking about how the different months would lead to different expectations on your cheese. Now we've got 4 different columns here: crumbly, cloth wrapped, bag wrapped, and hard cooked. Now to be just super clear, cloth wrapped means literally wrapped in cloth. Bag wrapped means wrapped in a plastic bag. Now these are 2 cheeses in cheddars that are actually as part of level 1. We talked about bag wrapped and cloth wrapped. Here we're going to see how they change over time, or don't change over time, or change over different amounts of time. So with a crumbly, at a young age, we're looking at a paler, whiter texture, more moisture around the curds. Curds are quite distinguishable from each other. I often think of it as a feta-like texture. But after 9 to 12 months, we have moved to a darker yellow. The curd structure has broken down. Suddenly it's become more cheddar-like, sort of smoother, still distinguishable cracks, but you don't have that kind of feta-like distinguishable curd round bubble thing. The flavors will move from acidic and to a degree sweeter to more savory and smoother. And if we look at our hard cloth wrapped and hard bag wrapped together as a pair and look what the differences are, the big difference with these 2 cheeses is that with a cloth wrapped, we have the possibility of air getting in and out. Okay, it's got a permeable membrane, which means we're losing moisture. Moisture is leaving the building, it's going out. So we're seeing a drying out of the cheese, and we are seeing the impact of the air on the biome, which gives us our molds and yeasts on the outside of the cheese, and that impacts on the flavor. And if you taste natural rinded cheddar or something like that, you'll find that it becomes harder, darker, and a slightly different flavor as we head towards the edge, whereas the center is creamier, lighter, and younger in character. But with a bag wrapped cheese, plastic wrap, there is no difference across the cheese. The middle is the same as the edge. There is no rind. It is a cheese held outside of its biome. You can have, I don't know, anything going on in that warehouse. You could be making bricks or making diesel machines or whatever you like. Doesn't matter. These cheeses are wrapped in plastic bags. Nothing's getting in or out. So their maturation is not affected by anything more than the moisture, the cheese, and the enzymes that's in there already. Now they do change. They very much do change, but they change more slowly and with less complex outcomes generally, because you haven't got these new ingredients of these new enzymes introduced by the molds and yeasts on the cloth wrapped external. The thing about the cloth wrap though is because change is not held back, eventually they decline, whereas a bag wrapped cheese won't actually really decline. It'll sort of stay bag wrapped forever, you know, and flatten off and little change. And you can get some 24, 36 month cheeses. They do tend to get stronger in flavor, but it's a very simplistic kind of strength. Now with your hard cooked cheeses, Gruyères, Parmesans, that kind of stuff, they've got an extra 12, maybe 14 months of potential maturation because you've taken out more moisture. You're slowing the process down because there's no moisture there, so the activity is lower. And you are generally coating these cheeses in a permeable but hard rind. And they can go straight past 12 months. In fact, they're not that interesting at 12 months. They're really kicking up at 18 months. And at 24 months, you've got some amazing, you've got really given that time to do its wild thing. And it's amazing. So these cheeses have much longer lived potential. As a rule, they use starter bases that have more sweet outcomes. They have heterofermentative starters, as in it's not just lactic acid bacteria, other things are being produced as well, and consequently you get some really interesting flavors there that are very well balanced. So some really cool stuff. So this table, just read through it. You're not going to be tested on this per se, but you're going to be tested in the context of understanding that moisture and time lead to the development cycles of these cheeses being a little bit different. Are you getting me? Have you got questions? Isn't it lucky this is recording so that you can go back and really have a lovely evening listening to it again? Christian, you're on the edge of your seat there. I can see. I can't wait to look at this again. Right. Okay. We're now going to move on to blue cheeses and look at their development cycle, how we would mature them. Okay, so blue cheeses. Now, it's always easiest to remember the length of blue cheese. I think when people go, how long is a blue cheese? Well, I always remember Stilton. Made in September, eaten at Christmas. Tired grass, end of the season. We've taken hay off those fields. The cows have eaten the rest. The grass is tired, but that makes good Stilton. 3 months later, best cheese in the country at the time, at Christmas, Stilton. That's why Stilton is a Christmas cheese. So that's how I remember that blue cheeses are 3-month cheeses. And that, broadly speaking, is true. It doesn't matter which tree. There are always outliers. But for the most part, we're looking for most cheeses set at the 3-month mark. So we're going to use that 3 months as an example here. All right, up to 1 month. Curd is white and crumbly, no blue. Claire, why is it not blue?
Because you haven't pierced it yet.
It is the question of the day, isn't it? Yes, we are not putting needles in it yet. We have not done that, so it's not blue. Now we're going to pierce it. At 4 to 8 weeks, cheeses are needed to allow oxygen to the mold spores. Okay. Then the blue appears, as if by magic, and it is light. It's turquoise. It's very light. It's only just beginning, just feeling its way. But the curd remains crumbly. The curd of the cheese remains crumbly at this point. It is not creamy. Now the mold begins to do the thing. So the molds release enzymes to break down the paste. Okay, so this is the thing about blue cheese. It's very easy to omit when thinking about it. You think of blue cheese as basically cheese plus blue mold equals the flavor you're talking about. No. Cheese is changed. The very white curd structure of a blue cheese is changed by the mold. It breaks it down in exactly the same way as a rind would break down the curd. So the whiteness of itself is changed. It's not just the introduction of the blue. So we're looking for the enzymes to break down the paste as well as to develop that tasty blue structure that gives us that spicy mushroomness. And then we head towards ripeness with our blue cheeses. Now with ripeness and blue, we've got weeks, sometimes months of ripeness. It's not like a camembert where we've got, I don't know, 14 days of when it's going to be at its good, sometimes less, but a nice long time of blue cheese. And here we have the paste is softening. The blue darkens from turquoise up to a sort of a bluey green. And it appears as in one of 3 formats. One is veiny, gorgonzola, which literally tubes of blue. They look like a tube, like a vein, like a proper varicose vein. Very nice. Webs like Stilton, we looked at the one earlier. We have it's like a smattering. There is the curds are closed together. There are no gaps. The blue has made its way between the curds. Tends to be crumbly cheeses that do this. So it's like it's painted on. And then we have little caves or pockets like Roquefort or Bleu de Verne, where you actually have open holes, often not connected to each other. There's a little pocket of blue here, a little pocket of blue there, where the curd has remained open from its construction when it first came to existence. The little holes are already there. And that it makes you Roquefort. So those are the 3 sort of blue-like structures, and that's when we think we're ripe. But the cheese, of course, will age past that if you let it. The pH rises from acidic to near neutral. That's what your blue is doing for you. As you get old, the paste firms, it becomes harder, and the blue darkens. So at that ripe stage, you can almost use a knife not butter would be too soft a word, but you would make a cream of it. If you scraped a knife over it, make a cream, not a crumble. But when it gets too hard, the paste hardens. It hardens, it can become very firm. And the blue becomes more blue, and it can diverge at this point, but it tends to go to a dark blue, sometimes gray blue, sometimes green blue, hard. And the natural rind around the edge of the cheese may incur if it's got one. So Stilton is beginning, the brownness is beginning to come into the cheese. You might see ammonia, and the blue structure becomes dominant across the cheese. Some cheeses now become, it's almost more blue than cheese. And finally, the paste firms up and may become gray or ochre. So the cheese, the main body of the cheese is no longer nicely yellow or white. It's now looking quite tired and old. And you might begin to be able to, if you put the blue into your mouth, you can get the crunch out of the blue. It's beginning to crunch up and becoming almost like almost calciumized, like it's becoming bony or bone meal. And the natural rind, if there is one, begins to really thicken up and you're losing edible cheese to the rind itself. So that's the journey of blue cheese. All white, blue begins to develop into a turquoisey-like shimmer where it looks pretty but doesn't taste good yet. Then the mold really begins to take hold and softens that paste up so it becomes creamy, a little more savory. The texture, the mouthfeel is really nice, and the flavor of the blue is becoming really interesting. You get that piquancy, that mushroom that gives blue cheese its character. And then it sort of peaks at that blue grain mold, and the curd is fully broken down into a cream. But it can go beyond that. It can become very strong. The paste becomes to darken, and it becomes quite. You can go off into kind of eye-winking kind of strength, or bitterness might occur, and other molds are beginning to come in from the rind into the cheese. Now that is a Stilton timeline. So the 3-month most common. To contextualize that, something like a Gorgonzola Dolce is also a 3-month cheese, but a Gorgonzola Picante is a 6-month cheese, can last for 6 months until it peaks. So there is some variability there. Right, how are we doing for time? 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to quickly delve into HACCP, I think, because we've touched on it today and we'll do the flavors next week. So let me just bring HACCP up. Is that my HACCP? Okay. So option share as the window is closed. Okay, we're going to share a screen. Okay. So that's given us a sense of cheese and everything that's going on around maturation. You'll learn more as you're going to read your affinage and grading during the week. But we've talked about the principles of HACCP. Last week, we talked about the natural defenses that you have as the cheese making process, which is acidity, temperature, and moisture. Those are your natural defenses that you use in cheese making. But in terms of cheese making process, we need to be more scientific. And the principles of HACCP, the 7 principles of HACCP. What are you seeing here? Are you seeing a nice screen with some gray bits? Cool. So we're going to need to know this. HACCP. This is a boring but essential and really, except for the terminology, quite sort of commonsensical approach to having good cheese making practice. Right. The first thing you need to do with HACCP is work out what might go wrong, okay? That's what you do. It's called your hazard analysis. It says, what's the hazard? What's the screw up? What is it? What do I know about it? Tell me about it. What's gone wrong? So you do a risk assessment and you find out what the outcomes are you don't like. Number 2, you go, whoa, what points can we stop that going wrong? What controls can we put in at which moments to stop the hazard happening? Nice and straightforward. You're asking yourself, how come we've still got 5 boxes left on the page? Because surely that's it. This could go wrong. We stopped it. This is when we move beyond you and me cooking in our kitchen, just being a bit sensible, to being able to prove to the outside world that what we're doing is a complete and traceable process. So easy first steps. What could go wrong? Stop it going wrong. We're now going to move into, okay, let's be specific about our limits. Like how wrong can we go before it's wrong? You know, so heating milk to 71.7 degrees C for 15 seconds, or pasteurization, as we all know it's called. That's our limit. So that we've got a very specific measurable outcome which we would have to succeed, so we know that's right. So our limits are the pedantic, specific, writable down, measurable bits of our critical control point. Then we've got to prove we get there. We've got to actually measure. We're not going to dip our finger in the milk or just look at it and go, that looks about right. We've got to do better than that. We've actually got to have some sort of tool that proves that we are at a certain temperature or time or whatever it is. We need to monitor it. Then we need to know what to do if it doesn't do what we expected it to do. So corrective action. Is there a corrective process, or do we junk it the whole thing and start again? Is there a chemical that we can add? We just need to know what we would do. So that is important. Then we've got to test it. We've got to prove that our thermometers are correctly calibrated. We've got to prove that our times, our stopwatches don't run too fast or too slow. We've got to make sure that our team are properly trained. So we need verification. We need to prove that we're doing what we're saying it is. And last but not least, write the whole thing down. Okay, nice and easy, right? Except somehow one always forgets this. There are 7 things. So Claire, you are going to remember hazard analysis and monitoring. Christian, you're going to remember critical control points and corrective action. And Timmy, you're remembering critical limits and verification. Okay, so you've got 2 seconds to remember your 2 things. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, off. Hazard analysis and critical control points. That's 7 points. 7 points, nice and easy. And number 1 is Claire.
Hazard analysis.
And what is hazard analysis?
Seeing what could go wrong.
Okay. What was number 2, anybody?
CCP, right?
Yep. And what is CCP?
Critical control point.
That's correct. So it's what do we do if find out when something could go wrong and put in a check. Number 3 was critical limits. Who was critical limits? Put them in the TV. Critical limits. That's knowing exactly what your control points do. Timmy, you've frozen. Obviously, HACCP is 2. Oh, you've all frozen, actually. I've got 2 smiling people and someone who's thinking a lot. Okay. Where have you gone? Come back to me.